So, hey guys, welcome to the latest episode of the SaaS Sessions podcast. Today we have Lavanya Gopinath on the show with us. So, with over 17 years of experience in creating, delivering, and managing software teams and companies, Lavanya is currently the Director of Operations at Chargebee.
It's a leading subscription billing and revenue management platform.
So, Lavanya, such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Sunil. It's my pleasure also to be here and to say hi to everybody who's listening. Very happy to connect with everyone.
Awesome. So, Lavanya, you're the director of ops at Chargebee, right? Honestly speaking, as we were talking earlier as well, I personally don't have a lot of idea on what the ops function do in specifically a SaaS businesses. Like I know what marketing ops does. I know what sales ops do because they are my target audience at WhatFix, and I have fair understanding of these two big operations team, but then there's a lot of different sub functions in this huge operations team that any SaaS business would have. The revenue ops and CS ops and partner ops and many more, right? So like before we get into that, just digressing a little bit here, before we get into talking about the ops for a SaaS business, can you give more intro about you and how did you get into the world of SaaS?
Sure. Said I started my professional career almost 18 years ago, and I have an engineering background, a computer engineering background. And so I went into programming, was a programmer for a number of years. I started with this company called Covansys, and it was on a public retirement product. So I was a programmer on the product, and then, over a period of time, I spent about 7 to 8 years on that product. So I moved across multiple roles in technical and management capacities. And it was a very interesting experience because it gave me enough context on what goes into building an enterprise product, because we were catering to huge public employment setups in the US, right? Like your say teachers retirement systems and public employees retirement systems. So these were huge systems, millions of people, several thousands of people paying into these systems. So building a product for that kind of a scale was something that was very helpful to learn early on in my career. So I did this for a number of years. I continued to be in engineering, then took a pivot with a bunch of friends, was part of the founding team of a music education startup. This was 2010-11, and it was called Music Guru. It was very early for its time. As you know, the education space is, in the late 20s now as well. It's picking up. So we were probably very early in the game. But it was an interesting learning experience. We were also working on the mobile space. So I did quite a bit of work on mobile as well. And after that mobile startup, we moved on. I then took up this role as head of mobile delivery at a mutual funds platform called Funds India. So again, that was very interesting. And anybody who's worked in the mobile space knows, right? Like you put your app out in the store, the kind of feedback that you get from like real customers who use it, and the pace at which you get that feedback is a phenomenal learning experience. So I thoroughly enjoyed doing that. And the basis of all of this is, product, designing and building products and managing their delivery. So I took that experience, came over to Chargebee, changed it slightly to move into program management for engineering and product, because Chargebee was scaling, and at that point they wanted processes and to build out predictability in product and engineering delivery. So that's what I was hired for.
Got it.
So worked about a year setting all of that up for the product and the engineering. And once that was done, I think expanded the scope slightly to now try and replicate the same building of predictability across the entire org. So in a line, I think that's what I tried to do. Build predictability across the org.
That's like a interesting journey that you've had, and great. So yeah, coming back to the original topic of discussion, which is operations in a SaaS company, right? So like what is like operations team do in SaaS company, or what is your day to day task, or weekly or monthly tasks look like, and what would be your deliverables basically, like for any ops team at large?
If you look at any operations, right, the work of anybody who works in operations is essentially to enable work to flow and for work to be effective. for whichever function it is that they're working for, right? And in order to enable people who are working in that function to be effective, right? You look at it from multiple dimensions. How can you train and enable people to focus on the right things? How do you hold on to the goals of the function and surface that for everybody so that everybody's aligned and focused? And how do you set up the right tools and processes so that people can leverage that in order to function effectively? So everything comes back to how can you enable people to function effectively, and you can do it through multiple areas, right? Through people and processes and tools and data, right? You just use all of that and keep surfacing information, but also enable people to understand the key things that they need to focus on. It's pretty much like the backbone on which everything else functions. You abstract out all of the underlying details so that people can focus on their core function.
Makes sense. I do understand that it has to do with, designing the workflow basically for, different teams and setting up the processes that they have to follow, and, using tools to, build the workflow and, set up the process to just simplify it. But then, so I was reading about, center of excellence, and does it has anything to do with, building a center of excellence? Because I think, or maybe you can tell us first, like, what is center of excellence for the listeners, and maybe, late you can also tell, is operations part of center of excellence, or is center of excellence part of operations, or how does both relate to each other?
Sure. So a center of excellence is just building out a competency in something, right? So that everybody kind of knows that this is a place from which that piece flows out, right? It can be anything. It can be a development center of excellence. It can be like a content center of excellence. So in terms of operations, I think the way we've looked at it is in Chargebee, there is a decentralized function level operations. And then there is a slightly more, I wouldn't call it centralized, but the next level of abstraction, which is what I work on, where it's more operations as a horizontal practice, right? And which interfaces with each of these function ops and actually enables cross-functional workflows and cross-functional information. So it's more a horizontal practice rather than a center of excellence.
Okay, got it. And then you mentioned about decentralization, right? So how do you like manage both, as you mentioned, like decentralization and centralization of things, right? Or of processes? Like, what is the difference between both?
It depends on the stage of the growth, right? Like, let's say when we start out and you're a startup, you're focused on getting your product out into the market and everybody's doing a little bit of everything, right? And then at a certain stage of growth, you get into a specialization where somebody takes care of the plumbing, so to speak, right? So that the rest of them can operate. And that would be early. Mostly you would start with, say, sales ops, because that's an area where it's more clear why you need operations, right? Yeah. So that's probably the earliest you would see operations. And over a period of time, so if you were to visualize the growth of an org as a pyramid, right? As long as the base keeps getting bigger and bigger, what happens is you start to feel the need for structure and focused operations across functions. So let's say sales and marketing start having operations slightly early in the game. Then you realize over a period of time in product and probably, again, support, you need focused operations in each of these areas in order to, know what you're doing and to focus on the right things. So then you start building out specialized ops because it makes sense, right? One person can't own everything because the focus areas are different. What you're tracking is different. Your work itself is slightly different. So building out function-specific ops actually makes a lot of sense. And initially, it's maybe 2-3 people, so you can just talk to each other and keep everything smooth and flowing. But again, to go back to the pyramid, the base keeps getting bigger and bigger. So how do you then enable all of these ops to be aligned, right? Got it. The operations layer itself is sufficiently, stretched that you need to make sure everybody is aligned. Makes sense. And somebody needs to have a slightly more bird's eye view of how information is flowing and how work is flowing. So that at that layer, there is smoothness in the flow. So at that layer of abstraction is where I guess, maybe you could call us systems ops or something, where at that layer, if you start operating, then you make sure function ops are all aligned.
Got it.
And so that's the layer at which I work on.
So it's like the meta for the ops itself.
Yes, it's meta ops.
Meta
You need to know a bit of everything because,
Yeah.
I mean, nothing is a silo, right? Each of their data flows into the other. One metrics influences the other team's metrics. So you just need to make sure it's all flowing well. Everybody is aware of what's coming to them.
Makes sense. And then in this process, right, like data is basically, as you mentioned, data is flowing from one team to the other, right? From the say start from marketing and it flows to sales, then it flows to let's say success, and then it flows to product, and then it goes to like partnerships and different teams, right? And so how do you ensure, right? Like everyone, like if a marketing ops person's seeing any kind of data about let's say one particular customer, one segment of customers, so how do you make sure that a marketing ops person and let's say a revenue ops or a product ops person is seeing the same data, right? So how do you maintain the quality as well as the consistency of the data throughout? Like what are the different tools maybe that you use to like maintain the accuracy of the data?
Sure. So I think that's a very important question, right? The ops layer at which my team operates, right? We take ownership for this data, right? And each of the functions are both, people who input the context and data to us, but as well as consumers of that data, right? However, ownership for the data integrity, the consistency, and for the source of truth, right, is on us. So, which means this operations team that I work on, we need to make sure we have all these conversations and pretty much understand the business that happens in each function. What is the point at which they capture information? What is the information they're currently capturing? What is it that we need to capture depending on where we're going? Right? You need to kind of, and you're never going to understand this unless you have a regular conversation and immerse yourself in the way that function operates. So one of the things to do is to have regular interactions with not just the operations people, but also the people who work on different roles in those functions to continuously build the context.
Makes sense.
Because you need to understand what you need to capture, right? And let us say you want to predict something 6 months down the line, you probably need to start capturing something now, right? So how do you then articulate this? How do you reason it out with the teams and come to an alignment on, okay, this is what we're going to look at. This is why we need to look at this at this point in time. So you have these conversations with functions, and sometimes you have to kind of bring them together around some central problem that you're trying to solve and what each team is going to bring to the table in order to solve that, right? And where the data is at right now. So this is a very iterative process. It keeps happening frequently. And one of the things that we do is, whether or not we have a specific agenda item, what we do is we call this the OpCon internally, where we catch up once a month, everybody in operations, right? Across functions, we just meet and we go over some of the key points. And this is something that I run because I have the context across functions. So I start surfacing things which I think everybody needs to know and open out some of these aspects for discussion. Let's say something like, okay, you're talking about customer segments. What does it mean exactly? And sometimes when you come into a room with different people, right, you realize they're actually looking at it slightly differently from their lens. So how do you then baseline everybody's understanding? That's a very important part of, making sure everybody's operating out of that same baseline. Because otherwise, even the numbers that you look at, it's going to be very different because they're going to look at it from their understanding, right? How do you baseline that? Then how do you enable people to, leverage the information that you have in the same way? So continuous communication, over communication matters a lot. But since there's too much of information flowing, I think it's very important to be conscious of what the priorities are and what you're surfacing. So maybe, just the top 3 key problems that you want to solve, it's important to prioritize that and then get everybody aligned. So I think that is probably the key things that my team owns.
Makes sense. And then what are the different apps, or platforms or tools that you use to, maintain this accuracy?
Marketing has its own stack, as you know, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you're a marketer yourself, and your stack month on month. There are so many tools coming up, and marketers typically want to experiment with new tools. So we work very closely to understand if there's any tool change. We want to understand why, and we want to make sure we build out the automation of the data, right? So all of the important data that everybody needs to consume, we pull it into a cloud platform, right? We're using GCP right now, but that can be tech agnostic, can change over time. But essentially, we own the ETL pipeline, and we make sure any new tool that comes in, we have an understanding of what data it is, where it fits in the larger context, and how soon can be automated. So, and typically we try to enable for key functions, say for a CRM product, it makes a lot of sense to have a two-way sync, because a lot of people who consume the data would prefer to do it within their own tool, right? They don't want to go to another place to look at something. And a lot of very relevant information, they would want it pushed back into their tool. So to make these decisions of, okay, what is a two-way sync? What goes into that two-way sync? And to keep some of the information centralized, then what is the cadence at which you want to share this information, right? Do you want to show something weekly? Do you want to show something within the hour, near real time? All of these things is something we make decisions on in collaboration with the teams, but also keep constantly communicating so that everybody has the same understanding. And the tools keep changing, Sunil, because every 3 months as we grow, we are a different company, we have different challenges. Doesn't mean to say we change in 3 months, but we keep tweaking our workflows, and we start realizing very soon that we're going to outgrow a tool as well. Right? So maybe if we are using, say, fresh sales now, then maybe that was too big a thing for us maybe 3 years ago or something, right? So it depends. So, and again, success has its own tool. So support, again, they use some kind of a tool, and then there are so many support systems, they want to experiment with things. They also add in a lot of other tools which integrate with their main tool. So how do you then get the data from that, right? You make some kind of checklist, I think. We want to make sure whichever tool somebody chooses that has a good API, because automating data inflow and outflow is very important.
Yeah, I think that's where meta ops
Matters a lot.
very
Yes.
important. And then, giving back the ownership to like each of these individual teams of their, processes, or their internal workflows, or their internal tools and platforms that they use, right? So in this case, how do you know, like, what's the single source of truth, or where is the single source of truth for you guys? Let's say if I want to check like one lead, or one company or one account in Chargebee, and so what is that, like, one place where you look at and you'll get all the information of that particular lead or account, right?
That's definitely the data lake and warehouse that we are building out, right? Where we pipe in information from different systems. Now, this kind of data, right, and not CDP just from a marketing sense, but like an overall customer data is a huge project, right? And it's work in progress, right?
Exactly.
So we're still cracking it. This is like we're continuously working on this. What we have is, so there are two aspects. The single source of truth in terms of the data is sorted, because we've built out the understanding that there are multiple avenues for inflow of data, but aligning all of that and pushing back, it is going to be our data democratization layer, so to speak, right? Which is that whole engineering piece, which we own and push out. So anybody who's looking at their own tool for a customer information, they can be sure that that's the most recent. They will know when it's been last refreshed, and they can consume it, right? So that's been taken care of. But this single view, we use Tableau for our visualizations at a certain level of detail, right? Where org-wide or at a leadership level, you want people to look at certain things from a very cohesive angle. So we use Tableau for those kind of visualizations, again powered by the same data layer. That's where we're building out this customer view that you're talking about, right? These various pieces, what happened to the customer at what stage, what contributed to this, who are the owners at various stages of the journey, how is the interaction so far, how is our relationship with the customer going, is there anything that we need to address, have we done a good job with them so far, how is the support experience like, right? Have they had too many tickets in the last month, and do we know about that, right? How soon do we know about it? So building out that piece, like I said, a lot of work, it's work in progress, but we put together like a single view, and you're continuously iterating on that.
So you mean that single view is in Tableau
It's in Tableau.
as of now? Yeah. So do you guys use Segment?
Segment is CDP.
Not only, yeah, I think they have CDP and they have like a bunch of other, things as well, features or, bunch of other
Right.
sub products as well.
Right.
So, but I've been a really big fan of, how it really helps in, managing the flow of data at least, right? And in a unified and in a consistent manner, right? So I've used it and I've, sort of helped a couple of friends implement it in their orgs. So fairly understand that, but I never did it for like all ops or like or doing it for a single source of truth perspective. I did it from a marketing ops perspective where there are like different tools. Like marketing ops would collect data from like 10 different tools, right? And then collecting that, and there is a single source of truth for the marketing team, there is a single source of truth for the sales team, similarly for product and different teams, and then there is a like from all these
Org-wide, base level of truth. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's kind of, I think Segment would help in each of these, like it's just the connector basically between two different tools which are out there. But really interesting to know. So as you mentioned, right, in earlier, that when any company is just starting up their product market fit, and now they're now 1 billion plus ARR. So you mentioned that the first ops function that they would start would be marketing and sales ops, right? So why is that, and how can they like evolve from there? Like let's say, how can a startup like set up their whole ops team right from their 1 billion to, let's say, 10 million journey, and so on.
Sure. If you notice, right, the reason why I think we start sales, marketing, and probably support ops as well, these would probably be the three first operations functions you find, right, is largely, I think, driven by the need, right? You want to understand how well your deals are flowing. You want to understand, how you've done, how performance is measured, because that's the way work flows. That's the way you incentivize people who bring in the deals as well. So the need for data kind of is very important there, right? Yeah, go ahead. You were going to.
Yeah, but that is there. But what if I am a startup, or not me, but there's a startup which is a product-led organization. In that
Right.
case, don't you think having a product ops team before your sales and marketing would would help you, because then you're inculcating product-led growth in your funnel, right? So you're going that model, like you're not going the sales-led model, or not, you're not doing the marketing led model, but you're doing the product led model. So in that case, so it would depend on what model
On
I
the model,
choose. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. So
Yeah.
if it's a sales led model, like for a B2B SaaS company, then it would be like sales and marketing ops that are being set up, and CS ops especially.
As well. Yeah.
And like if it's a SaaS company where I'm selling like 10 15 $20 a month, and my product is fairly product led growth. So in that case, is it product ops that should be set up first?
That's a very good question. I think the context of your model will matter on what information you need, right? And it's not just information; it's what you want to structure in the at the first level. So I think the moment you start feeling a need for a structure is when you'll start feeling the need for a dedicated operations person or a operations team to start looking at some of these things. And absolutely, I mean, if it's a ELG company, then you should probably be looking at the ops that makes the most sense to you, right? Absolutely. And your tools largely take care of this for some of these operations functions. And for the others, it's more putting together a bunch of things depending very much on your framework for selling or your framework for pipeline and all of that, right? So depending on those customizations for some functions, I think ops is also a very customized function team.
So really great, but before we go on to the lightning round, which is the last final round of this show, so what are some of the best practices that any startups at any kind of stage that they're in, and they want to start, let's say, the ops function, which at your level, or they want to start at, let's say, an individual ops function at at an individual function level. So what are the best practices that they can follow, and what are the mistakes that they can avoid?
I think it starts with framing what is the problem that we're trying to solve, right? Having a very clear understanding of that is really important. You need not have a decentralized operations function simply because another company that is very, at a similar stage is doing it. If your culture, indicates that this is the best way for you to operate, then you need to choose a model that's in line with your culture. You need to have a very clear understanding of what is the problem you're trying to solve and why you want to solve it now, right?
Right.
Framing the problem, I think, is the key. Once we understand what we're trying to solve and why now, structuring which of the operations you need and how they're going to work together, right? Whether it's centralized or decentralized, will start making a lot of sense and we'll have a lot of clarity. Then we can go out and hire people with those kind of capabilities, or somebody can wear that mantle and drive it forward. But I think probably would be the most critical piece. But if you hit a certain revenue and you have a certain number of people driving the growth, operations is definitely something to consider because it keeps everybody accountable and it enables the teams to focus and execute, which is what you want when you're going after growth.
No, makes sense. No, that's like a brilliant piece of advice for anyone who's looking to build the ops team. So quickly now shifting to the lightning round. So I have three questions, Lavanya, for you. So first one, what do you know about your work now that you wish you would have known when you first started?
I'm a bit of a generalist. My role's been changing every couple of years. I've been taking pivots on it. I think what I'm going to, if it's okay, I'll answer it slightly differently. What I would have told my younger self as opposed to what I would have known now, not just in this role, but I think in any role, the fundamentals of working remain the same, right? It's to be okay with making mistakes, and it's to very quickly learn from them and build on it. It's not to get into an analysis paralysis, but to actually take some action, right? It's okay if the first version of it is really bad. As long as it solves a small problem, that's fine. You can continue to build on it and improve. Being okay with a lame first version is something you should be okay with the lame first version is what I would have told myself.
Yeah, same with products also, right? Like you should ship if you don't have a lot of feedback on your product, I think you have shipped it too late or something
Absolutely.
like that.
Yeah.
Great. So second one, so like what did your biggest professional failure teach you?
Okay. I think I'm a bit of a rational person, so I don't really bring too much of emotion into work. And I think for a lot of my career, I thought a lot of people operated like that, which is so not true. So I think trying to talk to people as people and understanding where they are coming from to a problem or to a conversation has been a hard lesson that I've had to learn over time.
Interesting. And then the last one. So, what's the number one thing that has helped you shorten your learning curve?
Reading inveterately, not just trying to understand the problem space I'm working on, but reading, trying to understand across areas, right? Like how does a manufacturing industry work? I mean, we learned so much from Toyota and things like that in terms of how to operate, right? So things like that. I think looking at other industries, looking at other areas, looking at musicians, singers, writers, best practices exist everywhere. So I think continuously being curious and asking questions and trying to learn and abstract it out and apply it to what I do.
Awesome. So thanks a lot, Lavanya, for taking time this afternoon and sharing all these insights with everyone on the show. I mean, I got a lot myself back from what operations or how operations function in a SaaS company, and why it is important to have an ops team and what they should do basically, like to maintain the consistency of the data throughout. So thanks a lot for taking time.
Thank you so much, Sunil. It's been a pleasure. And if there are other operations folks out there listening to this one, I'd be totally happy to listen and learn from them. So, please connect.